We were the news of the World Theater Collective, moving from city to city together. We were married to one another and to the idea of figuring out what you could pull from the streams of the news that ran over, around, and through our lives. We wanted no one to ever let that information splash over them without thinking. So much unnoticed linguistic and conceptual sewage. Celine and I were with the company for 6 years, starting in '98. We were in the Tenderloin in various cities during the year when we were touring by bus, and at last back home in San Francisco, where it eventually all broke apart for us. The beginnings of the collective were rough, improvised. We began working with the news by accident. Celine and I had just gotten together when we met Robert Zamarin as part of an impromptu guerrilla memorial protest in downtown San Francisco, the week after Matthew Shepard's murder. After the protest, Robert said he and his sister Julia were putting together a small dance theater collective and asked if we would be interested in joining them. The collective's first performance, that meant anything to anyone before we even had a name, took place in the living room of the tiny Turk Street apartment the co-directors shared. Robert was our primary director, our impresario, and a writer. He was very tall, with short, dark curls, his hands and face pale against his dark turtleneck. His face had a cubist look, as if it had been smashed with a hammer and put back together a little too quickly. We set up chairs at the perimeter of the room, so we were surrounded by our tiny audience. Celine and I mimed lovemaking and fighting, pinning each other's arms and baring our teeth. We dripped red paint over one another's bodies and let it run down onto the newspapers we rolled on. I slid across her, my breasts against her belly, my legs imprisoning her. She shook me off onto my back and let her dark hair fall across her face, aware all the time of her beauty as a theatrical element that had to be managed to prevent it from becoming distracting. Boyce, a Midwestern farm boy, a dancer who'd turned to the theater in his 30s, moved towards us, his hands in menacing positions, starfish, fists, a pantomimed knife thrust. Meanwhile, at the back of the room, Robert read Milton in an ominous voice. First, Moloch, horrid king, be smeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. Julia climbed a rope toward a hook we'd hung from the ceiling. Our audience shifted and sighed, yearning for it to be over. It was a yearning we shared. And then Robert, in a moment of inspired desperation, made use of one of the theater of the oppressed's methods he'd been fascinated by since long before we'd begun working together. He combined a newspaper theater practice with our dance. He dropped Paradise Lost and picked up a section of a smeared newspaper from the floor. He read from it rhythmically. I wish I could remember the passage. Something violent and ordinary that you'd never notice if you read it on the train, in the bathroom, over breakfast, or on a break. If you felt a little sick afterward, you'd put it down to too much coffee or too sweet breakfast muffins. But when Robert read it, it got through. In response, Julia, Boyce, Celine, and I began to improvise, pulling each other into new shapes, geometric and tense. We could feel the audience, a live entity, breathing with us that night for the first time. From that time on, Robert, backstage center, would read lists of the dead from a current war or border conflict, or vivid stories of local crimes and disasters. Boyce, Celine, and I, with our bodies, made news of dance, or vice versa, trying to find new ways of embodying without miming the texts. Our strategies to get people to hear the news worked for years, and we thought we could do it forever. Celine's and my final rehearsal with the company, we didn't know it was going to be our last, was for a piece we knew nothing about ahead of time. Julia was gone, apparently on her way to do mainstream theater in New York. Nobody could understand her ability to suddenly turn her back on everything that had mattered to her. No one could understand her cheery goodbyes and refusal to say when or if she'd be back, and Robert's silent rage. The company never had much to say about which of Robert's ideas we were going to be carrying out, but ordinarily he wasn't mysterious. He was more likely to call us at 6 a.m. if he had a new idea. This time, though, all he said was, "Rehearsals start Tuesday." On the Monday night before rehearsal, Celine and I were in bed playing gin rummy. We played a lot. Board games, cards, and sometimes noisy sexual dramas, complete with costumes and role-playing. Because we lived in a huge, rotting Victorian in the Haight and had 5 roommates, an actor, 2 dancers, and a painter, we had a lock on our bedroom door for privacy and thick hangings on every wall. "Maybe Robert is planning to do something fun," Celine said. "For once. He better break it to us slowly, or there'll be a revolution." We were both naked, propped against pillows, our cards in our laps, legs resting against each other. I said, "Maybe he'll read the spring fashion news and you can strut your stuff for us. It'll be all about the power of beauty and how you make them suffer with longing." "I'm getting a little old for that stuff," she said. "You idealize me, Jessie. I'm past that stage." She dropped her cards on the floor and turned to lie on her side, her back to me. I looked down at her from above, seeing how the bedside lamp, a handmade affair of old seashells we'd found at a thrift shop, illuminated her eyelashes against her cheek. I was a little miffed, but I decided to let it go. It made me puff up with pride that this stunning creature belonged to me, that I was the one who gave her pleasure, looked after her. But it wasn't such a bad deal for her either. She required a lot of looking after, my Celine, like a large and sometimes bad-tempered Persian cat, needing constant attention, unable to tolerate unpleasant food or too much sunlight or wind, easily lost in strange cities. I put my arm around her, and she snuggled up to me, the full length of her body against mine. When we arrived in the Mission the next day, the usual guys stood on the corner in the front of the dollar store next to the building that held our rehearsal space. They were unshaven, staggering, given to fights. They tended to wear old army fatigues or jeans, their caps pulled over their eyes. One of them said, "Honey, can I have a light?" An old guy, the smell of fear, anger, and alcohol drifting off of him. "Not tonight," I said. He looked at me in surprise, as if he hadn't realized I was there until I spoke. He said, "I wasn't talking to you, Jack." I smiled at him and shepherded her inside. We reached our performance space by walking through a nonprofit gallery and climbing the rickety stairs to a room behind the gallery's office. Our space could hold up to 30 chairs, which we set ourselves up on show nights. The gallery downstairs displayed work by new young artists, pieces that sometimes set our mind on fire and sometimes embarrassed us. Vials of bull's blood, photos of blurred fields or pointillist cityscapes. Though our performance room was a blank box, the gallery had a huge wall of windows, the light slightly dimmed by an iron gate, looking out onto the dirt and primary colors of Mission Street. I always felt a little suffocated, leaving it all behind to go up to the windowless white room. When we saw the huge photos Robert had pinned on the walls of the performance space, Celine wheeled around, staring. She'd refused to look at the pictures when they first appeared online. Now she gagged, then swallowed. I put my arm around her. We'd all seen the images, but not like this. Robert had spent a good chunk of change getting color photos blown up so that the humans in them were larger than life. The camouflage of the fatigues showing brown and green, the blood bright against skin and floor, naked bodies smeared with mud or shit, some clutching each other, lying in piles. One man crouching in fear of a black dog, a hall of shiny metal doors behind him, his hands up almost across his face, bags over the heads, Raw wounds, bandaged or not, soldiers with guns and smiles, a girl with a leash, another girl in fatigues crouching beside an anonymous body, half covered here and there by bloody cloth. The scissors she held next to the body's fresh wounds. A man in fatigues beside her, both of them wearing dark watch caps. Her face, her tilted head, her smile, her gloved hand giving a thumbs up. In another image, there she was again, over the body of an unshaven, bandaged man, his dead eyes closed, ice packed up to his neck. Her smile, was that a smile? I couldn't look at her. It was like suddenly coming up against a funhouse mirror. Robert leaned against the wall, dramatically enacting both the seriousness of his determination to carry out this new idea and his attentive interest in our responses. The room felt inhabited by a cold excitement, like an electric field. Walking up to the pictures was like pushing through occupied airspace, as if there were a humming in the walls, as if there were other people outside our field of vision, talking at sound frequencies above or below our range of hearing. Alex, Van Ann, and Boyce sat on the floor, glum, their faces shuddered. Boyce began to do stretches, his face in his knees. He was such a farm boy, even in his big city leathers and chains, that he hardly ever said a word. Van Ann, the youngest member of our company, was swift-moving, self-sufficient, and often wickedly funny. She'd grown up in the Laurel District in Oakland and had studied dance at Mills. Today, she wore leggings, an A's t-shirt with the sleeves torn off and the neckline ripped, a leotard and boots. Alex, who'd only been with the collective for a couple of years, pulled strips of rubber off her sneakers. A skinny girl in her late 20s, she usually sang or did beatbox or toning. Her readings incantatory. In her strange, wandering voice, any newspaper or advertising fragment sounded like a call to another world. She'd been sleeping with Robert for months, which of course we all knew about, although it was apparently supposed to be a secret, just as we'd known a couple years earlier when she and Julia had been secretly involved. They were alley cats, the Zamarans, though Julia at least usually stayed away from members of the company. Robert, though, was another story. It seemed that one of us should intervene if it wasn't already too late. Neither Alex nor Boyce would say anything, and we had a very small group for this early rehearsal, though perhaps Jake, Jolene, or Lizbeth would be joining us later, unless Robert was planning to keep the show small. Julia would have at least told us what we were up to. We hadn't understood before she left quite how much she made it all happen. Her sometimes scattered willfulness had made her seem more decorative than she was, less of a load-bearing pillar. Laverne might step in her 50s, originally from New York. She'd been a dancer and an actress for more than 4 decades. She'd done everything, from Mary Zimmerman and August Wilson off-Broadway to the sorts of impressionistic pieces where performers climb up and down ropes to the accompaniment of electronic music and obtrusive lighting. She appeared with multiple local companies, and we were lucky to have her at all. After Julia left, she'd said to Robert in front of us all, "We're a collective. Maybe we should make decisions together about what we're going to do next." Robert, in his newly savage way, had said, "Dears, as far as I'm concerned, every one of you could run the Royal Shakespeare Company. But, as it's worked out, I happen to be the director of this company. So, could you try trusting me?" He'd gone to Juilliard, unlike the rest of us, and was a wizard with funders. We relied on him far too much for our basic support. But in the old days, he hadn't thrown his weight around like that. I said, "The material is too fresh. Why don't we take a break from current news? Why not do the Crimean War? Or how about My Lai? I'm not sure what we're going to add to these photos. We could stand naked in front of them and do nothing. Anyway, I don't know who would come to these performances or why. Maybe creeps getting off on the pictures?" I tried to keep my voice firm. My body shook whenever I stood up to Robert. It might be that coincidentally my hours would be cut, or Robert would be unable to support me in getting a particular teaching job, or not a single one of my ideas would make it into the new performance. With Julia gone, no one was there to keep him in check. He said, "Children, we perform the news, yes?" Alex said, "It's our job, right? To bear witness to the things our audiences don't want to see or think about. But they come to us because at some level they count on us to show them what they already know. What a relief it is to stop denying it all. And once they face it, they can take action." Her tacit job in the company was to say to Robert what no one else could get away with. Sometimes he'd even listen to her. Right now, she was handing out the party line. "Probably, mostly, we get people who enjoy feeling indignant and then heading home to the suburbs," I said, frowning. Celine, either because she was genuinely upset or wanted to distract Robert, gave a huge sigh and reached out to him. He put his arms around her and she rested her head on his shoulder. Years earlier, back when I was a painter, I'd had sex with men sometimes. I still occasionally feel a flicker of attraction, but it's very diminished. And none of the people I used to sleep with seem quite real now, even the ones I wanted badly at the time. I've always been faithful to Celine. I've never been sure whether she was faithful to me. She'd said a couple months earlier, after a particularly exhilarating rehearsal, "If you and I were to have a baby, maybe Robert could be the father." I was afraid to ask if she'd ever slept with him, or if she was thinking about it. He certainly acted in public as if she belonged to him. And he wouldn't let his relationship with Alex slow him down. I did sometimes say to Celine that we could leave and go elsewhere, New York, Chicago, someplace where we weren't always navigating around Robert. What other company would take us both on? And could you go back to just dancing after this? She said. Because of Robert's genius at getting grants, none of us had to work more than part-time at day jobs during shows. We temped or taught a class, sometimes a theater intensive, over the course of the summer. But none of us had to wait tables or work full-time, and we wondered to what extent were all of our best ideas a result of Robert's suggestions and prodding. Robert gently wiped Celine's face with a handkerchief. "My baby." Before I could stop myself, I said, hearing my own voice as sullen and spiteful, "My baby, technically speaking?" He looked over at me and said, "Jessie," a comical reproach, so full of complicit amusement that I found myself returning his smile. So, there weren't going to be any consequences. Instead, I would be masterfully forgiven. He turned to the group. "I have readings for you all. Celine, you can start with the trial transcripts." He handed out a stack of articles, and we sat down with them. We read more or less in silence for a while. Van Am said, "Are you going to read these during the performance?" "I want to watch you work first," he said, his tone inviting us into a marvelous and serious game. "Then I'll know if we read from these or find something else." For the next hour and a half, we traded articles, laying on the blue exercise mats, moving to uncomfortable folding chairs, standing for a while, leaning against the walls, careful not to touch the photos. The air stirred around us, an invisible crowd. We had food, but no one was eating. We read about the Special Access Program, an entire secret military life, no checks or accountability, with both a daylight and a shadow structure. The white guys making speeches and denying all knowledge, and the black guys who had hidden power and unlimited approval to capture, interrogate, and kill high-value targets. The detainees were moved from prison to prison so that even the system itself often lost track of where they were. Almost every source pointed out that information extracted by torture was likely to be useless invention. Most of these pieces said very little about the stuff that had been all over the TVs and daily news. The ongoing sexual party, the lurid details of who was sleeping with whom, who had gotten who pregnant. The guards had been told to soften up the detainees. But who were the others in these pictures, in the testimony? What might those insane, cheerful, proud smiles be about? I caught myself trying to imagine how to dance this, and was afraid I'd humiliate myself by throwing up in the rehearsal hall. At least this would be a genuine human response, or else the result of a desire to have a genuine human response. I said, there is nothing we can do to add to, explain, or ameliorate any of this. It would be disgusting. We're not going to change anything by doing a dance. We'd be like a lot of head lice. Even if it were news no one had noticed, which, hello, not so much. Robert stood grandly before the photographs. This is what is happening, here and now. There will be a few scapegoats. Then the whole country gets to forget it ever happened. Take it for granted. During his explanations and exhortations, the magic usually kicked in. The sense he, as no one else, could create of including each of us in a charmed inner circle. The mechanisms that foster torture will continue untouched. We need to find a way to make people pay attention. 10 or 11 people at a time, I said, putting down my article, unless we get a full house. And who's going to want to watch this? I don't think we should do this. Van Ann said it. Do Laverne and I have to be the ones again to bring up the role of racism in this war in the first place? Can anyone else do it for a change? It's intersectional, of course. Robert gave a small bow, one that said he'd thought of every possible objection or angle before any of the rest of us possibly could have. I knew when I came in today, he said, that I'd be attacked. Often, those with the least confidence in taking on artistic challenges are the most vocal in resisting them. I said, I didn't say I'm not up to it. I said it was pointless. Celine poked me in the side, and Alex said quickly, it depends on what we're after, doesn't it? Who do we want to see this piece? People who know about it and haven't been able to take it in? Or people for whom we could illuminate it in some way? The strays and the converted, Boyce said. Celine said, I wish we could do stories about heroism and self-sacrifice. Maybe if we gave people a positive example, we'd inspire them to change their lives in the world. We could show people dying for each other and their beliefs. We could do Joan of Arc. She had a very Joan of Arc expression as she said this. It was easy to picture her suffering and determination as the flames rose up around her. You have an original mind, Robert said. That's your charm. You're a lovely creature with no clue about anything, and somehow that becomes your great strength. She turned to look at him, her face aflame with betrayed fury. She opened her mouth, but Boyce leaned forward. Hey, did you realize that Jessie looks like her? He pointed at the central photograph, the girl crouching over a man's body. Bandages covered his face. She beamed as if she were being photographed on Christmas morning, showing off her favorite present. Robert smiled, his eyebrow raised again, as if this were part of his plan. Maybe he was just quick to catch a cue. Celine sat back, breathing deeply. She looked down at the pale, polished wood of the floor and drew patterns in the dust with one finger. Robert pointed to Boyce. Lie down on the ground with your arms behind your back. He turned to me. Kneel beside him. Menace him in some way. Absolutely not. I picked up my jacket and headed for the door. Come on, Celine. Jessie, said Celine. Any evidence of anger had disappeared. We'd find out later if her fury had gone underground, if she developed a migraine. She'd been having a series of them after a demonstration where we'd been stuck in the hot sun. I told her before we went out that she'd be better off staying home, but she's never known her own limits. Boyce said, let's try it out. Maybe we can really touch people in some way. Maybe this will make them take some action, like Celine said. What action would that be? Asked Celine. She had a pleading expression on her face. I put down my jacket. Boyce lay down, pulling his sweater over his head as if it were a hood, and held his wrists together. I knelt over him and pushed him in the shoulder, hard enough to roll him to the side. I pulled back, feeling a little sick. Our hungry, invisible audience waited. That's good, said Robert. The rest of you can be guards. He looked at Celine, who dropped to the other side, lying next to Boyce, her arms behind her back. Robert looked at Laverne, who had just walked in. She picked up the articles and flipped through them. In a newscaster's voice, she said, "The president is sorry that people seeing these pictures didn't understand the true nature and heart of America." She frowned and tried again. "The Secretary of Defense has described the detainees as unlawful combatants. As such, he says, they do not have any rights under the Geneva Convention." Sounds like I'm being ironic, she tried in an ordinary voice. Seymour Hersh says, "Of course, Saddam tortured and killed his people, so now we're doing it." Boyce curled into a ball and began to inch away, leaving me kneeling over Celine, who pressed her wrists together and arched her back. I leaned across her, placing a spread-out hand over Boyce's face against the wool of his sweater. Celine and I caught each other's eyes and dropped our poses. Alex, still sitting on the floor, said, "It's not believable." She shook her head helplessly. Boyce said, "All we're doing is reenacting it. Why don't you stand there and read the accounts of Milgram and those experimental subjects who went on turning up the shocks? Jesse can work the controls." Robert said, "Jesse, you're a guard. Tie up Celine." I unbuckled my belt, slid it out of my jeans, and wrapped it around her wrists, pulling it through the buckle. She jerked in surprise, though I was trying to be gentle. We played some bed games with velvet handcuffs and blindfolds. Now, it was as if a nightmarish version of our private life were happening in public. Trying to act as if this meant nothing to me, I said, "The prisoners should be wearing fewer clothes." "Why don't you take your clothes off?" said Boyce, muffled by his sweater. "I don't believe you as a guard," Robert said. "You're a Girl Scout learning to do rope tricks. Stop trying to make us like you. Think of the worst thing you've ever done." Looking around the room, I could see that everyone had been sent back to what kind of memories? I realized I didn't know most of their secrets, though we'd been working together for ages. Boyce had broken his father's nose once, but that was retaliation when he was finally big enough to protect himself and his sister. Celine hadn't spoken to her parents in 5 years. She came from a part of the Midwest where some people still think there's something wrong with us. I tried to think of my own worst thing, but everything seemed so low grade. I'd left one scary, pathetic girlfriend by refusing to return her calls or emails. I'd given away a friend's secrets in 6th grade, her bedwetting and eating spoonfuls of sand, and pretended not to know who had made her subject to endless tormenting. When my friends were shoplifting in junior high, I hid out in another part of the store in case they were caught. Robert was right. Every gesture I made, on or off stage, showed my cowardice and yearning for approval. I couldn't be dazzling, but I could be nice. Above me, in the central panel, the girl grinned. She'd stepped across a divide, and the photo proved it. She was a citizen of a new country now. A channel opened up in me, like water pouring in, the starving watchers both inside and out. I yanked on the belt, tightening it around Celine's hand. Her back arched again, a painful-looking spasm. She rolled over, the belt beneath her, her shirt twisting up to reveal her skin. After a moment, I raised my thumb, smiling up at Robert. There was a long silence, the rest of them staring at me. Celine shook herself free and backed away. Alex put her arm around Celine. Robert didn't seem to know what to do next. "Not the thumb," he said finally. "The thumb is really... She should do it," said Alex. She spoke with some urgency, and I could see the others nodding, even Celine. No one was looking at Robert. They were watching me, alertly, waiting to see what I'd invent next. "I think we have to have the thumb," I said. Robert stood up very straight, making himself taller. "Don't start enjoying this," he said. "That would be taking it a little far." "I'm not enjoying anything." My head felt like it floated above my body. If the thumb had been his idea instead of mine, he'd be insisting on it right now. "You're not such a good girl after all, are you? You see, you can cause pain and like it." He changed his tone, squatting beside me and placing his hand on my arm in what appeared to be a kindly gesture. He murmured, comforting me, "I know how hard it can be to mix your work and personal life, and what it must be like to be you in your position. I want you to know that you do have an essential role in this company. We have to have a Celine, but think how impossible it would be to put on a show without people like you as well." A wild rage blew up and through the top of that now open channel, pouring out of my head and mouth, and it felt wonderful. "Take your fucking hands off me," I said, my voice shaking, hissing into his face, feeling myself become monstrous, my face a distorted mask. "I feel violated when you touch me. You know a goddamn thing about me or my relationship or anything else at all. Don't call us at 6 in the morning anymore. Don't touch either of us. Don't pretend you care about me in any way, shape, or form, or that you want me in this company for any reason other than to look after Celine. At least I'm not a person who lives to be admired and then behaves like a totally pathetic, bullying brigand." All the air went out of me. It had seemed I was saying something, but I realized it was all stupid. Brigand? Who said brigand anymore? I didn't know if I even believed what I'd said or if I had tricked myself into letting Robert set the terms of my defiance. He was so much smarter than I. Everyone stared at me as if I were radioactive. Celine began to cry. Robert's face had gone very still. "You'll need to come and talk with me in the morning." It was clear from the unmitigated coldness in his voice that he was planning to fire me. "First thing," he said to everyone else in an almost normal voice, "we'll call it quits for the night, go home, do some free writes, see what you think. We'll start again in a couple of days. I'll have some choreography for you, based on what I've seen here." He usually said, "Good work!" no matter how bad we were. And for that moment, however often we had heard it, we felt a wonderful sense of absolution. I left so many rehearsals and performances remembering that, after all, I loved to be in his company, and there was no one more magical. He began unpinning and rolling the photographs. Boyce, starting from the opposite wall, working his way toward that central panel. On the way home, Celine said, "Are you crazy?" It wasn't a question. I shrugged and said, I shrugged, and she said, "I can fix this if you let me." We were on a night bus, drunks and crackheads, kids in their fishnets and piercings on the way to the clubs, teenagers inhabiting their story about their gang lives. Selena always sat by the window. I took the aisle seat between her and the world. I said, I do believe I've remembered the worst thing I ever did. All of the worst things I ever did. It's actually things I didn't do. People who were hoping I'd look after them. All I do is send money to various organizations and write some letters and emails. I go to demonstrations if they seem safe. What have I ever risked to try to stop what's happening? I sit in my cars and I sit in my house and let the cattle cars go by. I'm a cold person, Celine. There's something damaged inside me. Maybe I was hoping she'd contradict me. Tell me how my loving her was proof I wasn't cold, and then I'd say that she was the only one, but she just took my hand. I went on. Don't even think about getting between me and Robert. I'm through with wheedling and giving in and letting you be charming for me. Celine, looking doubtful, squeezed my hand. She didn't think I could overcome him, but she was wrong. I knew where his soft underbelly lay, and for the first time, I was willing to twist the knife to get my way. His power lay with his ability to charm and confuse us, never to go after more than one of us at once, to put us in a position where we didn't feel safe defying him. Inside, though, he was as frightened and ashamed as anyone, afraid he'd lose his command over us, afraid we'd stop worshiping him. But if I kept showing up and doing my parts, eventually he would have to let it blow over.